Welcome to our study on the book of Romans. This is the Romans Education, Part 4. And this is Session 1. Now that's a little different, and I know, and your notes say Romans Education 4, and I want to explain that because remember that talk we had at the beginning of the sessions last Sunday where I said, I'm looking at this in a little different way? Well, so here's how this is going to work. I'm going to refilm some of that. Actually, I'm going to refilm it up to here. But I don't want to refilm from here on. So I'm actually now titling this the way it will be when this gets broken up, the way it's supposed to be. So there is a Romans Education 1, and that is going to be in Romans chapter 12, verses 1 and 2. A Romans Education Part 2, which is going to be Romans chapter 12, verses 3 to 8. There's going to be a Romans Education Part 3, which is Romans chapter 12, verses 9 to 16. And there's a Romans Education 4, and that's Romans chapter 12, the remaining of the chapters 17 to 21. Now we're going to be doing Part 4. And when I divide that up, you'll see in a moment why I'm dividing it up that way. I'm going to leave that up because I'm actually going to give you a pretty neat little outline here that's going to allow you to kind of get the whole chapter 12 broken down in your mind in a very easy way. These three are, right, let me go this way. These three are that the instruction and wisdom that comes from our Father, and let me just put this up. This is going to be Romans chapter 13, verses 1 through 7. And these are the instruction in godly justice. So now you know what it's going to be all the way through 13:7. So we're not abandoning that. It's just that these are broken down into component parts. And I'm going to show you these. I think it's going to be very easy. Once you see this, it'll be very easy. And the flow of the doctrine, again, I'm referring you back to what we talked about last time. The flow of the doctrine is going to be much easier. We're going to cover this ground quicker, just to give you an idea. These verses, 17 to 21, we're going to do 17 and 18 today. We may finish up the rest of them in the next time we have sessions. So it'll take us two Sundays to do Part 4. Y'all are all in shock. Okay. But, that's the direction that we're headed here. And so that's the reason that I'm rearranging the information. I'm going to do some retaping and title these just that way. So this actually would be Part 4. Okay, now let me just kind of set our thinking up right here from the beginning by quickly reminding all of us what it is that our Father is doing with the doctrine that we're encountering. He is transforming us by the renewing of our mind. Remember, we saw that back in the beginning of the chapter. And so what He's doing is He is getting us thinking differently about all kinds of things. And really, what's being talked about here, these are all, and I'll just go ahead and get these lined out, these are all relationship issues. And I'm going to title them for you in a moment as we complete this outline. But this chapter so far has been talking to us about all these different relationships on the basis of what we value and esteem. And I'm using that because I could have said on the basis of what we love. But this kind of love that I'm talking about, we've mentioned it before, is not that warm, fuzzy kind of love that you feel naturally for family members and things like that. This is something you're making. Okay, Karen's laughing like, okay, may not be so warm and fuzzy. Okay, but this is a conscious decision that we're making to value someone or something and place that kind of importance on it. So that's what is happening here. So let me say it again so we don't lose what I'm trying to get to. So far in chapter 12, everything we've encountered up to this point is talking about a particular relationship that we're having And it's based on what we love or what we value and esteem. And so this doctrine is going to begin introducing us to the things that will transform our thinking so that we actually can labor with our Father right here on this earth, and later labor with Him in eternity up in the creature. Okay, so here's how this started. In fact, let me just kind of outline it for you here, because the chapter started out by transforming an aspect of this is our relationship to God in Romans chapter 12 verses 1 and 2. Now, as a matter of fact, I actually have this on a PowerPoint here, so let me just give it to you here. The first thing is our relationship to God, and that had to do with presenting our bodies a living sacrifice. We were told back there it was our reasonable service. So that's the first relationship that gets transformed. It's not that we didn't believe in God before we got to Romans 12 or any of that kind of business, but the policy of evil wants us to get to thinking about God in a particular way. It may be surprising that Satan really, you would think that maybe his agenda is to get people, not to believe in a God. But that's irrelevant really to what he's doing. I'm not saying that wouldn't serve him, but you don't have to you have to be an atheist in order for Satan to be successful with you, is the point that I'm making. And so the policy of evil really wants you to look at God in a different way. And just to name a couple of them off the bat, he wants you to start thinking about God delivering you from every bad thing that could ever happen to you in the world. And that's what he's supposed to do. And the way to get him to do that is for you to perform up to a certain standard. And that is pretty much encapsulated in what everybody believes. Except us. And a few others. But that's the way that works. So this is transforming our relationship to God. The second thing is our relationship to ourselves. Now, I know that kind of sounds odd to say it that way, to say, well, the relationship to ourselves, but remember what you get told in that section of the Scripture? That we are not to think of ourselves more highly than we ought to think. So this is really changing the way we think about ourselves. How is the natural way for us to think about ourselves? The way the course of this world wants us to think is, you're an individual and you need to look out for number one. You need to make sure that you're taking care of you. And look, when you're in sonship, you're no longer just an individual. Now you're part of a body. And now you understand that because you're part of a body, that you have an obligation to function as part of that body so that the body as a whole can do what it is supposed to do. So it's not about being an individual anymore. And that changes because it's always about me, and now we're supposed to esteem others greater than ourselves. The edification of the other people in this room ought to come ahead of our own edification. It's not that we're going to neglect ours, but it's that we're going to have a priority set here among ourselves, one with another. Here's the next one. Our relationship to other saints. And we found out that we're supposed to have this godly, loving kindness. And there's all kinds of things that we learned in those verses about how we're going to treat other saints and how we're supposed to view them. And as we were kind of segueing into this just a moment ago, we're supposed to view the saints of this assembly as being so valued and so esteemed by us that our goal is to, remember that in honor, preferring one another, to advance and increase the edification of the other people in this room. And it's not about dividing up into factions. It's about us being all members of one body and looking out for each other with that kind of thing in view. And now now I think everybody has that down, right? But I'm just trying to pigeonhole this for you so you can see. This thinking, this new thinking that we're given transforms our relationship with God, our relationship to ourselves, our relationship to other saints, and now you're about to get introduced to another kind of relationship. And this is your relationship to your enemies. And if you say, I really don't have any enemies, good for you. Won't always be that way, but good for you. I'm glad for that. And by the way, if you're not really embroiled in World War IV with somebody, that's perfect. You want me to tell you why? The time to talk about the doctrine is when you're not in the middle of that situation. Can I just pause here to say something? Even though let me use me for example. I know what God is and is not doing based on what He says in His Word. I know what He's trying to accomplish, and I know why He's trying to accomplish it. So do you. But when I run into somebody that's in the middle of a very difficult situation, that is not the time for me to introduce them to that doctrine. Because it's difficult for them to hear it. The time for Milt to have heard this was not when he was in Houston. I mean, that would have been tough, wouldn't it? That would have been tough to do. It would have been tough for him to hear. If the first time he were to hear this is when I walk into the room and Billy sits down over by Barbara and I go, Milt, I have something very important to tell you. Wow, that wouldn't be the time to tell him God's not intervening. God's not guiding the hand of the doctor. God's not supernaturally raising. That's not the time to do it. So I'm talking to you today about enemies. And since no one came in the door today talking about their mortal enemy, this is a good opportunity for me to do this. Because if you hear about it up front, then you know. All right, so we're going to talk about now. And by the way, I'll just fill in the chart. We're not going to get there today. But Part 5 of the Romans education in Romans 13, 1 through 7 talks about our relationship with the government. Every part of our life is going to be covered by Paul. Now, when you look at this, isn't that, the ones we've covered, can't you see that? You see that, right? All right. So isn't this really, when you look at it like this, isn't this a really easy way to say to yourself, oh, you know what? This is about this, and this is about this, and this is about this. That really is what he's doing. He's talking about how this is going to start changing us in just that way. Okay, so now that we're at verse 17, which is part 4, let me give you the scripture, and this is going to finish us out through the chapter. Okay, but it's the introduction to our godly justice. Here we go. Recompense to no man evil for evil. Provide things honest in the sight of all men. If it be possible, as much as lieth in you, live peaceably with all men. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves, but rather give place unto wrath. For it is written, Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. Therefore, if thine enemy hunger, feed him. If he thirst, give him drink. For in so doing thou shalt heap coals of fire on his head. Be not overcome of evil, but overcome evil with good. Now, what we're looking at here in this passage is the introductory doctrine of how we're going to respond to enemies who are persecuting us and are seeking to do evil or to harm us in some way. And when you look at that word evil, that's a very general way of describing anything that's injurious or harmful. And it doesn't have to be physical. It can be emotional or mental in nature. There's someone ruining your reputation, or there's someone that's doing, but it may be physical in nature. Whatever it is, now we're getting introduced to the doctrine that deals with that. And by the way, we got set up for this back here in this section right here, because remember verse 14? Let me give it to you. Bless them which persecute you, bless and curse not. Now, because we're doing that, let me just make another chart here. So, the first thing we're told to curse not, but what we are told to do is to bless. And that is to say, not to say those things which are injurious, but to say those things which are beneficial. The Apostle Paul does this. This is a pretty... Now, I'm going to correct the questions, or I'm going to answer the questions you have in your mind, because as I go through this, you're going to get a lot of questions raised in your mind, and I'm going to answer them. And I think I'm going to answer them all so that you don't have to actually ask them. But let me just say this right at the start. When Paul is talking about bless them, and I'm going to later, I won't do it today, I didn't put it in the notes, we could turn over there. But when Paul is writing one of his pastoral epistles, he talks about someone who has done him great harm through the words that they have spoken. And he says, this person did great harm to me. And he names them by name. But instead of saying, I hope he, eats dirt and dies, instead he says, may the Lord reward him according to his work. And that's not meant in a sarcastic way. That's not a fancy way of saying, you're going to get what you deserve. He's really saying, because even though he may have done that to Paul, his whole life may not have been characterized by that. Paul is saying, may the Lord reward him according to his work. Now, is Paul denying that someone was his enemy? No, he says it outright. This guy did me great harm through the words that he has spoken against my work.
Isn't he praying also for that man to come around?
Well, I believe that he does. I believe he wants that guy to come around, and I believe he's giving the doctrine to enable him to do that. So I'm trying to kind of quell one of the questions here, and the question is, so we just act like nothing happened? Well, Paul's certainly aware that this guy is his enemy. So what I'm saying is, God is not asking you to be in denial about this kind of adversarial relationship. What He's doing is instructing us about what not to do and what to do when we find ourselves in that situation. Now let's take this again and let's look at this passage. And I want to show you that in this passage from 17 to 21, and I shrunk it a little bit so I can get it all up. I hope you can still read it. There are 3 negative imperatives. The first one is, let's do this. Do not and do. And I'm going to put these 2 categories up. This was verse 14. Now when we get to verse 17, recompense to no man evil for evil. So do not repay evil. And there's verse 17. There's a negative imperative. The next one is avenge not, and I just took it out of verse 19. I'm just skipping down there. Dearly beloved, avenge not yourselves. So in verse 19, do not avenge yourself. And then down in verse 21, be not overcome with evil. And so do not doesn't work there. Be not overcome. Do not be overcome with evil. So there's the 3 negative imperatives. And for me, that made it real easy to break this thing down. You're given 3 things not to do. But not only that, because here's the point that I want to make here. It is not enough to not do something. As sons, we have to go to the other side of the ledger, and there's something we are called to do. So when you say, well, I didn't say anything bad about them. Good for you. But that's not enough. You now have to turn around and do something positive. And that's the bitter pill sometimes. But that's what this doctrine is working in us. And so, for verse 14, we've already seen it. not to curse them, but to bless them. All right, so now there's something else that I want us to see about this. In fact, I've got it on a PowerPoint here. We do not repay evil for evil. We do not avenge ourselves. And we're not overcome with evil. Now, what is it on the positive side of the ledger? Well, the first thing that we do is we don't repay evil for evil, but we provide things honest. I really shouldn't have included the rest of that in the sight of all men. We'll get to that. But really the pertinent part is we provide things honest. What does that mean? We're going to talk about that in just a few minutes. The second part of this is it's not that we don't avenge ourselves, but we give place unto wrath. There's something we're being told about that. He's not telling you to be angry, but there's something that we are doing. And in that last negative imperative, here's the positive one. While we're not overcome with evil, we are overcoming evil with good. So for all of those three things we're not to do, we're given three things to do. I want to call your attention back to the things we're not supposed to do. Why in the world would Paul, do you think, point those three negative things out? Well, let's do four, because we'll include verse 14. You don't curse them, you don't repay them with evil, you don't avenge yourself, and you're not overcome with evil. Why would he say don't do this?
Because we can't show God's love for that.
Okay, you're absolutely right. We can't show God's love if we do that.
But that's everything that the world could do as well.
That's exactly the knee-jerk reaction, isn't it? That's the way the world looks at it. If they did that to me, we have all those little pithy sayings, don't we? And we've all said them at times being funny, and we've never carried through with them. Well, a couple of you are, you know who you are. But the rest of us have not carried through on those. But we do this. I don't get mad, I get even.
I get better.
I get better. See, you know what? We have all those little sayings that indicate that. And by the way, this is evident even in the lives of small children. You don't have to teach kids this. It's this. I'm going to get you back. It's part of their. If you've ever watched some little kid hit a kid, the little kid he just automatically, just whatever gets done to him, he does it back. And you know what that is? That's a perfect description of repaying evil for evil. That's exactly what that is. So the Bible is saying we don't repay evil for evil. What we're going to do is we're going to provide things honest in the sight of all men. All right, now, right now, this is a pretty good group, so I don't worry about it here. But on the DVD right now, I know there's some people having a really hard time because they've gone through some situations and they're thinking about this, and this is not what they wanted to hear. Besides, if you made a movie about this, nobody would go see it. What they need to see is the guy getting even. They want to go see the guy blow people up, shoot them down, ram them with their car. See, that's the word, isn't it? They want justice. That's what they want. By the way, is there a payday for evil?
Oh, yeah.
Well, sure there is. So, really, there is in every man, lost or saved, there is some sense of what is just, and that wrongs have to be righted somehow. And that's not wrong to think that. But listen, as a son, especially in this dispensation of grace, that's not enough to think about. We have to think about more than that. Now, it's easy to walk in accordance with this world. It's easy to repay evil for evil. Children may do it very simply. When adults, we just become more devious about how we do it. And so, what the Bible is talking about is, and we're here in 17, not repaying evil for evil. This is something that your Father wants to accomplish in you. is to get this kind of an attitude in every one of us. Now look, this is not to say, this is going to answer another one of those questions someone is probably thinking about right now. So if someone does something to me, if they destroy my property or if they do something, then I'm just supposed to let that go. Listen, God has developed recourse within the court system for those kinds of things. What He's getting away from here is you going out and meting out your own brand of justice and fair play. Because it's vigilantism. Because if you do that, you know what you have going now? You have anarchy. Because that never ends. You see? Because this is Hatfields and McCoys.
Listen under the law, eye for an eye.
Oh, see, yeah, exactly right. And that's exactly what the law was talking about. It was an eye for an eye. You're going to pay because of what in kind for what you did. But in this dispensation of grace, folks, now I'm going to take you ahead a little bit. You say, but wait a minute. But if they did something wrong, there is a system. By the way, this is one of the reasons that God is the creator of human government. Government is meant to do this. If you've ever watched any of those lawyer shows on TV, you always notice that when someone has committed a crime and they're being sued, it's the state of Texas versus whoever. And you know, so that gets removed from this is an individual thing to now the state in its role of government is now going to right a wrong. Justice is going to be served. Now, I know what someone is asking about this time right now, and that is, well, what about, because there's a lot of this going on in the country right now, what about when that system is corrupt? Well, let me translate that for you. What that really means most of the time, I'm not saying there is no corruption in any government system, state or federal or local or any other way. But most of the time when people do that, what they're really saying is, well, what about when they don't do what I want them to do?
Exactly.
That's really what's going on with that. And look, your Father has an answer for that too. Because He realizes that human government is not perfect. One day, there will be a government established on this earth and a government established in the heavenly places, and it will be a government of righteousness. But we don't have that yet. By the way, folks in this room are going to be filling those governmental positions up there in the creature. That's really what those are. When you talk about principalities and powers and thrones, those are governmental positions. I know you thought you'd never run for office. Well, you're not running. No one's going to elect you. But you're going to have the privilege of serving in your Father's justice system in the creature. It's way more than that, but that's an aspect of it that's real. I mean, you really are going to be making decisions on your Father's behalf.
Grand jury.
By the way, when you get up there with your glorified body, those minions of Satan, they're going to be indicted, and justice is going to be carried out on them too. I mean, you can't get away from this. But my point is that there is a provision for this within the framework of human government. And God is the one that does that. And so, but what He's talking about here, don't let me get off track. What He's talking about here is, in our personal conduct, we do not seek to injure someone who has injured us. You don't get to say, well, you know what? They hit a baseball and it went through my window. I'm throwing a baseball through their window. This is what this is talking about. Your own personal conduct toward that. That has to be in line with something that your Father is doing. Now, let me tell you why He wants it this way. Because you may look at this and say, well, that looks like we're being a doormat. And I'm actually going to address that in just 1 minute. This is not about being a doormat. This is about recognizing that there is something that your Heavenly Father wants to accomplish through us responding to our enemies differently. There's something He wants to do in the midst of that. And if we don't cooperate with that process, if we don't stop doing this and start doing this, if we don't do that, what He's trying to get done is not going to get done. If we love the work that our Father is engaged in, if we want to see His business as it is right now succeed, then this is the formula for making that happen. And the truth is that we ought to value and esteem for right now. For now, I'm not saying there's not a payday out there. That's why I started to say a while ago to kind of clarify this issue. There is a payday coming. But guess who decides when that payday is? Yeah, our Father decides that, not us. Now you could do this through the courts, but believe me, here's what I'm going to say. We are supposed to value and esteem the work that our Father wants to do with our enemies more than desiring justice right now. That's got to be the thing that motivates us. Now, I said that, but that is easier for me to stand up here and say than it is to do. Because the day will come when you'll have a real enemy, and you've got to think about, I value and esteem what my Father wants to do with them more than I want to get even. That is a change in thinking. And that is what our Father wants to do. Now I have to say a couple things here before we take this break. It's at this point right here that people really do have a problem with several areas. And so I want to talk about this very briefly. I can remember my whole life hearing these kinds of phrases. We all have to get along, and we have to love everybody. That is the world. And by the way, there's nothing wrong with getting along. I'm not fixing to undo that. But the world's philosophies never carried this to the extent your Father's wisdom does. All they really wanted to do was just get along for the sake of getting along. Your Father wants to do more than that. Your Father actually wants to do something in the lives of people. And really and truly, folks, the best atmosphere for God's work to be done is in an atmosphere of peace. That is the best way to get His work done. And so we're going to find this thing repeated over and over about living peaceably with all men, because there's a work that God desires to really get accomplished in them. And so people would say, well, then you're just being a doormat. You're just letting people walk on you. And that is not the case at all. Because of what you understand your Father wants to do here, you are consciously choosing to not think about this the way you've always seen it done your whole life, but you're choosing to look at this from the standpoint of your Heavenly Father, and you're going to provide things honest, and you're going to give place unto wrath, and you're going to overcome evil with good. And that's an important issue for us to get in our mind. God's purposes here are missing in the world's philosophies. They don't show up. And by the way, the world just doesn't go get even. If you look at this, I actually went online and I looked at revenge quotes just to see. And they're not just over here, I don't get mad, I get even, but they're also over here about we just need to get along. But you know what that does sometimes? That suspends justice altogether. Just let it go and don't worry about it. Your Father is asking you to put that issue in His hands, and He's going to, in fact, if we were going back and looking at this, He says, Avenge not yourselves, but give place unto wrath. And when you read verse 20 over there, here's what Paul quotes. Vengeance is mine, I will repay, saith the Lord. God says, here's your job as my son. Respond this way right now. My job as your father is to make justice out of everything that's happening. Now, you say, why is God doing it that way? There's a reason. I'm going to tell it to you when we come back from the break. And when you see it, you're going to be glad He does that. Because we have been the recipients of this postponed justice as well. Because you really don't want immediate justice. Because if you got that, we'd all be in trouble. Okay, so what we're looking at is we're looking at opportunities here that we have for God to do a work in people by a right response, by a godly response to them. Here's the last two things I'm going to say about this before we take the break. Someone says, so does that mean that we can't protect our family? No, that's not what this is talking about. This is not talking about throwing away the responsibility to protect your children and your family. That's not what that's about. This is not about you're in the street and you see a car coming that you're not going to jump out of the way. This is not about getting in front of trouble or lining yourself up for a bad situation or a harmful situation in some way. This is not about becoming a doormat. It's not about any of that. This is about a godly response that is very different from the world's response that can actually result in ministry being carried on in the life of your enemy, whereby they no longer are your enemy. But even better than that, because if you say, wouldn't the world be a great place if nobody had any enemies? Well, that would be great, but wouldn't it be greater if it wasn't just the fact that we weren't enemies of each other, but we were actually now reflecting God's righteousness in the world? Because, folks, that's a step up. Your Father is asking you to answer a higher calling than what the world sees. Because the world can promote, let's just get along. Now your Father is giving you a doctrine whereby you're doing more than just getting along. You're actually allowing God to do. You know what? If the guy is lost, it's not just that he's not your enemy. Wouldn't it be better if he wasn't your enemy and he came to Christ? Wouldn't that be better? That's what I'm talking about here. He's saved, but he's my enemy. Well, would it be great if he wasn't your enemy? Yes. But wouldn't it be better if he not only wasn't your enemy, but he understood how to serve God in this dispensation of grace? Wouldn't it be better if he actually reflected the glory of God back to principalities and powers? Yes. Yeah, so, this is more than just the world's idea of, well, we just have to get along. That's what you say to your kids when they're little and they can't get all the adult stuff in their head. You hold the switch up and you go, you're going to get along. But you know what? When they get older, now there's basis behind that. And now in the Word, there's an even further basis behind that. And that basis is, it's not just about, because we can all get along and wind up in the lake of fire. We can all get along as Christians and wind up worthless in the creature. There's something more here that your Father wants to do. And when He talks about heaping coals of fire on their head, He's not talking about throwing them upside down in your barbecue pit. It's not killing them at all. No, it's not killing them at all. And we'll talk. I can't wait till we get over there and we can actually talk about that. That term. Well, and we'll talk about it when we get over. You almost lured me in on that. Thank you. All right, so we'll stop here. We'll take our break, and when we come back, we'll take up the rest of this verse and verse 18, and we'll finish.